As dawn's light gently filtered through the curtains, Gregor Samsa stirred in his bed, feeling an unusual heaviness in his limbs. The morning routine that once seemed mundane now felt impossibly daunting. He lay there, staring at the ceiling, grappling with a strange, pervasive sense of discomfort. His thoughts were muddled, and a peculiar sensation coursed through his body unlike anything he had ever experienced before. The alarm clock's relentless ringing jolted him into a reluctant state of wakefulness. Gregor's eyes darted to the time, and panic gripped him as he realized he was late for work. The prospect of facing his stern boss filled him with dread. His family depended on his income, and the pressure to perform weighed heavily on his mind. With great effort, Gregor attempted to rise from his bed. His movements felt awkward and cumbersome, as if his body was no longer obeying his commands. Every small action required an immense amount of concentration and willpower. The familiar surroundings of his bedroom seemed strangely distant, and he felt an odd disconnect from the world around him. In that moment, Gregor Samsa understood that this was no ordinary morning. The world he had known had shifted in ways he could not yet comprehend. He was no longer a human being, but a monstrosity, a horrible vermin. His body had transformed into a grotesque, oversized insect, with numerous legs that thrashed awkwardly around him. Metamorphosis, a book written by none other than Franz Kafka, is an intriguing story of Gregor Samsa and his family. Symbolically, Gregor's story delves into three parts, just like the three stages of biological metamorphosis: the egg, nymph, and adulthood. First part is about Gregor transforming into an insect and his immediate reactions to this change. Part 2 is isolation, where his family and the outside world becomes increasingly distant. His physical and emotional suffering intensify, and family's attitude shifts from concern to resentment. Final part can be titled as The Decline, leading to a tragic climax as Gregor, after being completely abandoned by everyone around him, finally dies. By telling us a story about a hard-working man who turned into an insect, Kafka tried to explore the human condition and the nature of suffering. Gregor turning into a grotesque bug serves as a metaphor for the humanizing effects of relentless work, societal expectations, and familial obligations. For Kafka, humans are burdened by things that define their identities, because without them, we are destined to be miserable. Gregor's identity was formed by his role as a sole provider for his family. However, after the transformation, that couldn't be the case anymore. Everything that was associated with Kafka's character was long gone now, which left Gregor in an anguish and total despair. This point is clearly shown in the first chapter of the book, where Gregor's initial reaction to this drastic change was fear that he would be late for work. In reality, just like any other human being, he was afraid to lose the very thing that made him a functional part of society. Gregor lost not only his ability to work, but everything that made him human: his body, his voice. Everything was gone except his human consciousness. The novella poignantly captures the isolation that comes with being unable to communicate one's inner turmoil, reflecting the broader human struggle of finding meaning and connection in an indifferent and hostile world. We humans are social creatures that rely on interconnectedness and relationships with other humans. Being abandoned might be one of the worst things that could happen to an individual, and overcoming that kind of ordeal does not seem to be feasible, according to Kafka. In Metamorphosis, abandonment might be one of the most important themes that Franz explores by characterizing Gregor's changing despair throughout the novel. Symbolically, Gregor went through 3 stages of despair correlated with the way he was treated by external actors such as his family. In the first stage, main character of this book lost everything he could possibly lose in terms of humanity. However, he was left with hope that everything would be okay eventually. Gregor felt like his family would ultimately accept his new self and love him regardless of this tragic change. However, it soon became apparent that the mere sight of him disgusted everyone around him, which led to stage 2, anger. Gregor did nothing wrong. He worked his whole life as a traveling salesman who provided for his family, while they accepted his hard-earned money as something they were entitled to. As soon as Gregor lost his societal role, his family rejected him. Just like society often ostracizes those who are different or unable to conform, Gregor's family abandoned him completely. This naturally made him furious. He wanted to be respected, to be acknowledged once again. So he started to rebel by climbing on walls and ceiling, ultimately escaping the room he was imprisoned in since the transformation. Unfortunately for Gregor, this act of rebellion did not accomplish things he so desired. Instead, his father finally showed Gregor that his life was no longer beneficiary for anyone, and his desires would not be answered. Father threw a couple of apples at Gregor, with the final one impaling him in the back, further hindering Gregor's ability to move. This was the final stage of his despair. The apple stuck in Gregor's back was a final blow that completely shattered his will to live, so the beetle stopped eating, stopped moving, and just waited for its death, eventually leaving this world abandoned by everyone he loved. This story is not a fantasy, but a very real and relevant problem even in today's society. People are treated as tools, where as soon as one is deprived of their usefulness, they get abandoned. Many people find meaning in things that define their identity, but how should one deal with the horror of getting stripped of those attributes, eventually being abandoned by the society? In the bleak and haunting landscape of Metamorphosis, Kafka does not provide a clear or comforting solutions to the existential dilemmas that he presents. Instead, his work suggests a deep pessimism about the human condition and the nature of suffering. Kafka's portrayal of Gregor's plight leaves us with unsettling questions rather than comforting answers. However, he does leave us with a powerful message that in the face of the world which can be dehumanizing and isolating, the search for meaning is both personal and universal struggle. He compels us to question, reflect, and strive for authenticity and connection in our lives. Through Gregor's story, we are reminded of the importance of empathy, the courage to face absurdity, and the resilience to forge our own path in an indifferent universe. Maybe Gregor was wrong by giving up in the end. Maybe his life was not a waste after all.